I thought uncovering my wife's affair was the worst betrayal I'd ever face, until I found out her secrets ran deeper, involving someone I trusted like family. My name's David. I'm 30, and my wife, Jessica, is 28. We've been married a little over a year, and together for about 3. To anyone on the outside, we look like one of those happy couples people post about, newlyweds living our version of the dream. I own a little cafe in town, one I poured years of work into, and she works remotely, which I used to think was a huge advantage for us. It meant more time together, right? Or so I thought. I'd leave for work early each day, feeling grateful I'd found a woman like her. Jessica's beautiful, ambitious, and smart. She always seemed to be that steady, calming presence in my life. She was the one who could keep her cool in any situation, make people laugh without even trying. She had this effortless charm, and I'd fallen hard. But that's the thing about trust, it can make you blind to the things hiding in plain sight. About a month ago, I started to notice small changes. Tiny, almost unnoticeable at first. Jessica was always home when I left in the morning, laptop out, earbuds in, looking like she was fully immersed in work. But she started closing her laptop whenever I came into the room, brushing off my curiosity with a quick, just some boring work stuff, or, you wouldn't be interested. I brushed it off too at first. She's a private person by nature, and it wasn't unusual for her to keep her work life separate. But after a while, the little things started piling up. That's how it began, subtle changes that seemed harmless on their own. But sometimes, it's those little things that signal the beginning of something bigger. Something you can't yet see. So, about 2 weeks ago, I started feeling this low-level anxiety every time I left for work. Jessica would be at home, all set up in her work corner, by the window. I'd kiss her goodbye, tell her I'd be back around 6, and she'd give me this absent-minded smile, barely looking up from her screen. At first, I thought she was just focused, but the more it happened, the more it gnawed at me. One day, I decided to surprise her. It wasn't anything big, just an excuse to see her during the day. I closed up the cafe a little early and brought back some pastries I knew she loved. I thought it would make her day, maybe remind her how much I cared. I figured she was working in the office, so I let myself in quietly, not wanting to disturb her focus. But when I got to the door, there was no usual click-clack of typing, no soft hum of a Zoom call. The apartment was silent. Almost too silent. Jess. I called out, but there was no response. Her laptop was on the couch, open but asleep. Her phone was nowhere in sight. I felt this strange unease settle over me, but I shook it off, convincing myself she'd just gone for a quick walk or was running an errand. I left the pastries on the counter with a note, telling myself not to read into things. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Then, a couple of days later, I noticed something even stranger, she had started dressing up more. Jessica had always been casual at home, sticking to her sweatshirts and jeans while working from her laptop. But suddenly, she was putting on makeup and wearing nice tops, even on days she had no meetings. I asked her about it once, jokingly, like, "Who are you dressing up for?" She laughed it off, saying it was just for herself, that she felt more productive that way. It was a small thing, but it kept sticking with me. Another week passed, and the uneasy feeling only grew stronger. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that Jessica was just trying to feel good about herself while working from home. But one night, I noticed something that sent me spiraling. I was washing up in the kitchen after dinner, and Jessica had gone to wrap up a few emails in the other room. She left her phone on the counter, which she never usually did. Lately, it had practically been glued to her hand. I know I shouldn't have looked, but the phone lit up with a notification, and curiosity got the best of me. There it was, a message from someone named Ryan. I didn't know any Ryans in her life, and the message was, a little too casual, a little too familiar. Last night was fun. Let's do it again soon. I felt like my heart stopped. Last night? She'd told me she'd been swamped with work calls all evening. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Jessica came back into the kitchen, and I quickly put her phone down, acting as if nothing had happened. She gave me a quick smile, like everything was normal, and started telling me about her day, just as she always did. I tried to keep my cool, nodding along and pretending I hadn't seen anything. Inside, though, my thoughts were spinning. I wanted to believe it was innocent, maybe just a joke between friends or a coworker. But something about that message didn't sit right. I barely slept that night, my mind going over every small detail from the past few weeks, the new clothes, the guarded laptop, the unexplained outings. I felt like I was starting to see a side of Jessica I'd never known, a side she was carefully hiding. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I tried to act normal, not wanting Jessica to pick up on my suspicion, but it was eating away at me. Every time her phone buzzed, every time she laughed at a message she wouldn't share, I felt this pit in my stomach grow deeper. One night, when she fell asleep, I did something I never thought I'd do, I checked her phone. I knew her passcode, but my hands were shaking as I entered it, half hoping I wouldn't find anything, half terrified I would. At first, everything looked normal, typical messages from her mom, friends, work group chats. But then I found the thread with Ryan. I hesitated, feeling like I was about to open a door that I couldn't close. And I was right. The messages were casual, but there was an undertone, an unspoken familiarity. Things like, "I can't wait to see you again," and "Today was perfect." No explicit details, no smoking gun, but enough to make my blood run cold. They had made plans for that same Friday, the night she told me she was working late to meet a tight deadline. I felt sick, like the ground had just fallen out from under me. I closed the phone, put it back exactly as it was, and sat there in the dark, grappling with what I'd just seen. I'd never been one to pry, never been suspicious. But here I was, sitting in silence, my mind racing with questions I was too afraid to answer. I wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What if I was overreacting? What if I was misinterpreting things? At the same time, I couldn't deny what I'd seen. For the next few days, I tried to act normal, going about my routine, hoping somehow I'd find an answer that made this all make sense. But deep down, I knew there was only one way to find out. After days of pretending everything was fine, I was at my breaking point. I couldn't keep acting like I didn't know something was going on. The thought of Jessica lying to my face, going behind my back, spending time with someone else, it was tearing me up inside. I had to confront her. I had to know the truth, even if it destroyed me. I spent the whole night running through what I'd say, imagining every possible scenario. Would she deny it? Try to turn it on me? Admit to everything? I didn't know what to expect, and that only made the tension worse. The next evening, when she came home from running errands, that took way longer than they should have, I decided it was time. I sat her down at the dining table, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself speak. "Jessica, I need to ask you something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is there something going on that you're not telling me?" She looked at me, her expression calm, too calm. "What do you mean?" she asked, her face blank. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "I saw a message on your phone. From Ryan." Her face froze for a split second before she covered it with a tight smile. "Oh, Ryan," she said, shrugging like it was nothing. "He's just a friend from work. We sometimes grab coffee when we're working on projects. You know how it is." I wanted to believe her, I really did. But I'd seen those messages, and they didn't sound like something you'd send to a casual friend. "Just a friend? Then why didn't you mention him before?" I pressed, my voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, just for a second, before she gave a little laugh. David, you're being ridiculous. You know I love you. I would never do anything to hurt you. I felt my throat tighten, my hands clenching under the table. The calm, the brush off, the practiced way she looked at me, it didn't feel like my Jessica at all. I could feel something slipping between us, something I was desperate to hold on to but knew I was losing. Then show me your phone, Jessica. If there's nothing to hide, then just show me. I held my breath, hoping she'd call my bluff, hoping she'd prove me wrong. But she just looked at me, the color draining from her face, her hand pulling her phone closer. And in that moment, I knew. Jessica's hesitation was all the confirmation I needed, but I still clung to some sliver of hope. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she had a good reason for acting so distant. But she just sat there, gripping her phone, and I could see the gears turning in her head, like she was scrambling for an answer. Finally, she spoke. David, this is ridiculous, she stammered, her voice wavering. I don't even know why you're doing this. Are you really that insecure? Insecure. The word hit me like a slap in the face. I'd poured myself into this marriage, trusted her completely, and here she was, accusing me of being paranoid. I could feel anger rising in me, a simmering frustration that I'd been swallowing for weeks. I just need the truth, Jess, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I've noticed the late nights, the secretive texts, the way you hide things from me. If it's all innocent, just tell me. But don't act like I'm the one imagining things. She looked away, her face expressionless, but I could see her fingers tapping anxiously on the table. Then, she let out a long sigh. All right. Fine, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I have been spending time with Ryan outside of work, but it's not what you think. Oh, really? I said, the hurt in my voice cutting through the silence. Then what is it? She hesitated, her eyes darting away from mine. I've been stressed lately, and he's been there to talk. That's all. Sometimes, it's nice to have a friend who isn't, you know, in the middle of things. In the middle of things? I felt like my heart was breaking all over again. She was trying to make it sound harmless, like I was overreacting. But the way she avoided my gaze, the careful words she chose, it felt rehearsed, like a script she'd been preparing in case this day ever came. Her explanation made my stomach twist. A friend who wasn't in the middle of things. I could barely process what she was saying. I wanted to believe it was innocent, but her body language told a different story. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes, the tightness in her voice, it was like I was talking to a stranger. Jessica, if he's just a friend, why hide it? Why not tell me you've been confiding in him? I pressed, feeling that desperation clawing up my chest. She sighed again, her face unreadable. Because I knew you'd react like this, David. You're turning this into something it's not. Her tone was defensive, almost angry, and for a second, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being too harsh, jumping to conclusions. But deep down, my gut knew better. React like this? I repeated. Jessica, you're my wife. You're supposed to come to me when things get tough, not someone else. I could feel my voice cracking, and I hated it, hated showing how much this was tearing me apart. Please, Jess, I need to know what's really going on. For a long, agonizing moment, she was silent. Her expression shifted, like she was struggling with something, wrestling with herself. Then, finally, she looked up, and I saw a flash of something I couldn't quite place, guilt, maybe, or regret. I didn't want to hurt you, David, she said softly. But, things just got complicated. My heart dropped. Complicated? What did that even mean? I felt like the ground was slipping away beneath me. What does that mean, Jessica? I asked, my voice barely holding steady. Are you saying, there's something more between you two? She didn't answer right away. Instead, She just looked at me, her face torn, like she was on the edge of some revelation she didn't want to give. I held my breath, waiting for her to say something, anything, to make this all make sense. But instead, Jessica just stared at the table, her fingers nervously twisting her wedding ring. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't plan for it to happen, David. It just got out of control." Her words hit me like a punch. "So, you're saying?" I could barely get the words out, my voice choked with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You're saying you've been seeing him?" She closed her eyes, nodding almost imperceptibly. I felt like my entire world had come crashing down. All this time, the late nights, the secretive texts, the excuses, they weren't just my imagination. She had been with him. The woman I'd married, the person I thought I'd spend my life with, had betrayed me. "It started off so small, David," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Just talking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. But Ryan, he just understood me in a way that," she stopped, catching herself, like she knew how much her words were cutting into me. "So, what?" "I didn't understand you," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You think I wouldn't have listened? That I wouldn't have been there for you?" She looked up, and for the first time, I saw tears in her eyes. "It wasn't about you," she murmured, and the words somehow hurt even more. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way. I thought I could fix it. I thought," she trailed off, her voice breaking. I sat there, staring at her, feeling a tidal wave of emotions crashing over me, anger, betrayal, confusion. This was the woman I'd shared my dreams with, who had stood beside me as I built my cafe, as we built a life. And now, with a few words, she had shattered everything. I felt like I was drifting, like nothing around me was real. Jessica kept saying she was sorry, that she hadn't wanted this to happen, that it was a mistake. But none of it made sense. She didn't even sound like herself, she sounded like someone who had rehearsed her lines, who had thought through every possible answer. I forced myself to ask, "How long, Jessica? How long has this been going on?" She winced, her hands clasped so tightly I could see her knuckles turning white. "A few months," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on a spot on the floor. "A few months." I sat back, feeling the weight of it. While I'd been running my cafe, pouring everything into making a life for us, she had been building something secret with this stranger. This man I knew nothing about, who had somehow gotten close enough to her to tear us apart. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Why, Jessica? I gave you everything I had. We were happy, weren't we?" I could barely get the words out, my voice thick with emotion. Part of me wanted to walk out right then, but another part just needed to understand why. How had we ended up here? She shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "It's not about what you did or didn't do, David," she whispered. "I didn't want to lose us, I still don't. I don't even know how I got here. It was just, he was there, and things got out of control." "Out of control?" I repeated, anger bubbling up through the sadness. "You could have stopped it, Jessica. You had a choice." She covered her face with her hands, the weight of her own guilt finally seeming to sink in. "I know," she choked out. "I know, David. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to stay. I don't know who I am anymore." And there it was. The woman I thought I knew had been hiding a side of herself that I never saw coming, and now, I wasn't sure if I could ever look at her the same way again. Jessica thought she'd gotten away with it. She thought she could keep her little secret with Ryan, that I'd somehow just forgive and move on. But she had no idea what was coming. I wasn't about to just walk away, leaving everything to her. No, I was going to dismantle the life we'd built piece by piece, and she was going to feel every part of it slip through her fingers. The first step was the cafe. Jessica knew it was my dream, my pride and joy, the thing I'd worked years to build from scratch. What she didn't know was that I'd been sitting on a buyout offer from a corporate chain for weeks. They wanted to turn my cafe into one of those sterile, trendy franchises with branded cups and overpriced merchandise, and normally, I'd never have let that happen. But now, I saw an opportunity. I took the offer, signed the paperwork, and closed the deal without telling her a word. The best part? Jessica hates this chain. She's called it soulless more times than I can count. So the day she walks in and sees our cafe stripped of everything we built, she'll know it was because of her. She'll see it turned into the very thing she despises, and she'll have no idea what happened to all the personal touches, the memories, the meaning I poured into it. That's gone now, and so am I, leaving nothing of myself behind. Next, I started preparing to reveal her betrayal. Jessica and Ryan had been sneaking around, using Instagram DMs to message each other, and I'd seen enough of their chats to make anyone sick. So I logged into her account, she'd always trusted me with her password, and took screenshots of every message between them. The flirty texts, the plans to meet up, all of it. I carefully sent these screenshots to a curated list, her closest friends, her parents, even a few coworkers I knew she respected. I wanted them all to see who she really was behind the mask she wore so well. But I didn't stop there. I found Ryan's girlfriend through a bit of social media digging and sent her the messages, too. She deserved to know the truth, just like I had. There was no hiding now, Jessica's secret was out, her web of lies exposed to everyone she cared about. Every single person in her life would see the truth. Then, I turned my attention to our finances. I drained the joint savings account and transferred it all into a new account in my name alone. This was money we'd saved together, but I wasn't about to leave it behind for her to start fresh with. I left just enough for her to handle her share of the bills, but nothing more. She'd have to figure out how to handle life on her own without the security net she'd been counting on. Finally, before I walked out, I left a note for her on the kitchen counter. Just a few simple words. You betrayed everything we built. Now you get to live with what's left. I took my bags, locked the door behind me, and walked away. Jessica wanted to destroy what we had. Fine. She can live in the ruins, surrounded by the empty shell of a life she tried to throw away. And I'll be moving forward, without her, and without a single regret. It was 2 days after I'd left, and I'd finally started to feel like I was breathing again, like I could see a future without Jessica's betrayal hanging over me. But that's when my phone buzzed, her name flashing on the screen. I ignored it the first few times, then finally gave in, curiosity, or maybe closure, getting the best of me. David? Her voice cracked, shaky and unsteady, and I could hear her breathing heavily, trying to hold herself together. Please, can we talk? I let out a cold breath, feeling the weight of every lie she'd told me, every moment she'd betrayed me. What is there to talk about, Jessica? You've already said everything by your actions. She was silent for a second, and I could almost picture her sitting there, trying to figure out what to say, scrambling to come up with an explanation that would make everything better. Then, she said something that hit me like a punch to the gut. David, I'm pregnant. I froze. Pregnant? After everything, this was the card she was playing now. She could feel my disbelief through the silence. It's true, David, she whispered, her voice breaking. I just found out. I was going to tell you, but things got so complicated. I made a huge mistake with Ryan, but that's all it was, a mistake. A distraction. He meant nothing to me. Please believe me. I felt anger rising in me, raw and painful, burning away any softness I might have had left. You expect me to believe that now, Jessica? After all of this? Yes, she cried, her voice shaking. I was lost, David, I messed up, but I never stopped loving you. Please, you have to believe me, for the baby, for us. I didn't respond right away, just let the words hang there. "You've lied too many times, Jessica," I finally said, my voice low. "You betrayed everything we had, every piece of trust we built. And now, you think you can say you're sorry, tell me Ryan was a distraction and that it's all fine? I can't believe anything you say anymore." "David, please," she sobbed, breaking down. "I swear it's yours, I swear, just give me one more chance. I'm begging you." But I just shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "You had your chance, Jessica. And you threw it away." I could hear her crying on the other end, her pleas turning into broken sobs, but it didn't change anything. The love we'd had was gone, shattered by her lies, and no amount of begging could piece it back together. Months passed, and things moved quickly from separation to divorce. Jessica had tried to reach out a few more times, but I'd ignored her calls, leaving everything to my lawyer. The betrayal was too deep, the lies too many, and each day that went by only made me more certain that leaving was the right choice. When the trial finally started, she was there, looking more worn than I'd ever seen her, like the weight of her actions had finally hit. I sat across from her, feeling nothing but numbness. There was one unresolved piece left hanging over us, the child. Jessica had insisted throughout that she was pregnant and that the baby was mine. To put it to rest, my lawyer requested a prenatal DNA test. Jessica hesitated at first, but in the end, she didn't have a choice. If she wanted to claim any support from me, she'd need to prove that the child was mine. The test results came back just before our last day in court. As I sat there, waiting for the verdict to be finalized, I saw Jessica stealing glances at me. When the judge announced that the DNA test results had arrived, there was a tension in the room so thick you could feel it. The clerk handed the envelope to my lawyer, who opened it slowly, then paused, meeting my eyes with a look that said everything. "The test is negative," he said, loud enough for the court to hear. "David is not the biological father of Jessica's child." The words echoed in the room, and for a moment, everything else faded away. I looked at Jessica, who had gone pale, her hands covering her mouth as if she were holding back a scream. I stood up, anger boiling over as I met her eyes. "So, Jessica, you told me Ryan meant nothing to you. That he was just a distraction, that you never slept with him, and that I was the father." My voice was sharp, bitter, and I didn't hold back. "And yet here we are, your baby isn't mine. Was that another one of your lies, too?" She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, unable to answer, her silence saying everything. The betrayal was complete, leaving no illusions left between us. I turned, walking away from her for the last time, leaving her to deal with the shattered pieces of the life she had destroyed with her own lies. Leaving that courtroom was like closing the last chapter of a story I never wanted to read. I packed up my life and left the state, determined to put as much distance as possible between myself and the life I'd built with Jessica. It was time to start fresh, and I had no plans to look back. After weeks of searching, I found a small, welcoming town a few states over, with a bustling but down-to-earth vibe that immediately felt like home. I rented a modest place and soon found a location for a new coffee shop, one with big windows, warm wood accents, and just enough space to create the relaxed, cozy feel I wanted. Pouring myself into the business, I worked from dawn until late at night, investing every bit of energy I had into rebuilding my dream. It didn't take long before my shop started getting a steady stream of regulars, locals, college students, even a few travelers who'd heard about the new cafe in town. I couldn't believe it, but it was like everything I'd built in my old life was coming together even better here. My coffee shop was thriving, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was, too. One day, as I was fixing the chalkboard menu, a group of regulars walked in, smiling and waving as they settled into their usual spot by the window. They invited me to join them after closing time, and soon enough, they became more than just customers, they became friends. We'd hang out after hours, sharing stories, laughing over drinks, and even planning weekend trips around the area. One of the regulars, a woman named Sarah, caught my eye early on. She was warm, funny, and had a way of making everyone around her feel at ease. We started talking more and more, and before long, those friendly conversations turned into something deeper. She'd bring in lunch sometimes, stick around to chat, and gradually became the person I looked forward to seeing most each day. When I finally worked up the courage to ask her out, she smiled and said she'd been hoping I would. It's been 6 months since we started dating, and I'm finally feeling that sense of peace I thought I'd lost forever. Sarah knows about my past, about Jessica, about the mess that nearly broke me. She's listened, understood, and never once judged me. With her, I feel like I can finally breathe again, like the weight I'd been carrying for so long is finally lifting. Starting over wasn't easy, but now, as I stand in my coffee shop surrounded by people who genuinely care about me, I know it was worth every step. Life was finally settling into something close to happiness. Sarah and I were spending more time together, and the shop was busy enough that I'd even hired an assistant manager to help. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, I was behind the counter, steaming milk for a latte, when the door swung open, bringing with it a gust of cold air. At first, I didn't look up. I was mid-conversation with a customer, making a mental note of orders. But then I felt it, a presence, something off in the atmosphere. I glanced up, and my heart dropped. Standing just inside the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the floor, was Jessica. She looked different, worn and exhausted, as if the months since the trial had weighed on her as heavily as they had on me. She stood there, unsure, her eyes scanning the shop until they landed on me. I felt a surge of anger, confusion, and, strangely, pity all at once. I didn't know what to say. She walked up to the counter slowly, and I felt every pair of eyes in the cafe on us, sensing something significant was happening. I cleared my throat, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "What are you doing here, Jessica?" She opened her mouth to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "David, I know this is the last place I belong, but I didn't know where else to go." The anger rose again, but I swallowed it, reminding myself that I was done with her drama. "I think you've done enough damage," I said coldly. "There's nothing here for you." She bit her lip, hesitating. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. Truly, David. I know it's too late, but I needed to tell you in person. And, there's something else you need to know." My stomach twisted. I had no interest in hearing anything more from her, but something in her voice, something desperate, made me pause. She took a shaky breath and looked around before continuing, her voice soft but filled with a sincerity I hadn't heard in a long time. "Ryan, he left me," she said, her face crumbling as she spoke. "I told him about the baby, but after the test results came back, he decided he didn't want anything to do with us." I felt no sympathy. I'd moved on, and whatever consequences she was facing were her own. "I don't know what you expect from me, Jessica. You lied to me, manipulated me, and betrayed everything we had. You made your choice." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, but I could tell she'd expected this reaction. She reached into her purse, pulling out an envelope and sliding it across the counter. "I don't expect forgiveness, David. But I came to give you this. It's for you to open when you're ready. And if you're never ready, that's fine too." She turned and walked back toward the door without another word, leaving me staring down at the envelope. I wanted to throw it away, to forget she'd ever come back into my life. But something about the way she looked, something defeated and broken, gnawed at me. Later that night, as I sat at my kitchen table, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, a handwritten letter from Jessica, filled with regret, apologies, and explanations for why she'd done what she did. But there was one line that made my blood run cold. "David, you're the only man I've ever loved, and the only one I could trust with what I'm about to say. Ryan wasn't the only one." The letter went on to reveal secrets I'd never known, lies that went far beyond anything I'd imagined. As I read, a chill crept over me, and I realized that my past wasn't as far behind me as I'd hoped. Sitting at my kitchen table, Jessica's letter spread out in front of me, I felt a sickening dread sink in. Her words on that page were raw, desperate, full of confessions I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I read each line, my mind racing as it filled in the gaps, adding layers to a betrayal I'd thought I'd finally understood. But Jessica had hidden even more from me than I could have imagined. The letter was full of excuses and apologies, explanations of how she'd felt lonely, of how she'd started to doubt herself, of how she'd felt drawn to anyone who paid her attention. But beneath the apologies, something darker surfaced. The line that had stopped me in my tracks was one that read, "Ryan wasn't the only one." She went on to name 2 other men she'd been involved with during our marriage. One of them was an old co-worker, someone she'd run into at a conference the year before our wedding. The other was someone I'd considered a friend. Tom. My stomach dropped. Tom and I had been close for years. He'd been there through the cafe's opening, celebrated birthdays, and even stood beside me at our wedding. He'd come to me after the divorce, acted outraged on my behalf, and had even helped me pack when I'd finally left. And all that time, he'd been hiding this from me. Jessica described meeting with him several times in secret, right under my nose. The very night she'd first met Ryan, Tom had apparently been with her, consoling her about our supposed distance. They had built a web of deception around me that I had never suspected, one that made me question everything I thought I knew about trust. As I stared at the letter, numbness washed over me, gradually replaced by an anger so intense it felt almost surreal. I thought back to all the times I'd confided in him, all the things he'd known, the advice he'd given. The support had been a lie, just as my marriage had been. I'd trusted them both, and together they had taken advantage of that trust in a way that was unforgivable. I looked around the kitchen, at the new life I'd built here, and felt the letter slip from my hand, drifting to the floor. For the first time, I felt a strange sense of freedom. Jessica's betrayal, Tom's duplicity, these things no longer held me captive. They were lies, yes, but they were also chains I'd finally broken. I picked up the pieces of the letter and burned it in the sink, watching the flames reduce every ugly truth to ashes. Jessica's secrets might have broken me once, but now they were nothing more than the last shadows in a life I was finally ready to leave behind. As the flames died, I felt it, a clean break, a final release. Whatever she'd hoped to achieve by coming back, it was over now, truly and completely. I had my life ahead of me, and for the first time, I knew that I could move forward without anything holding me back.